Welcome to week 3 of the 4-part Pride in Cooking series, where each week I am making a new recipe for the first time on camera inspired by a pride flag that describes me. This week, in light of my birthday and to celebrate everything that I've accomplished so far, I'm going to make a cake inspired by the non-binary pride flag. Make sure you stick around for the series conclusion next week when I wrap up with a special message about pride in cooking. In the meantime, let's make that cake. I'm on a journey to discover what goes into the food we eat, why it matters, and how we can use this knowledge to make our own cooking taste better. After being diagnosed with 17 food allergies, I'm determined to relearn how to cook, rethink how to eat, and reimagine what mealtime looks like. The non-binary pride flag was created in 2014 and features 4 colors: yellow, white, purple, and black. The yellow represents people with gender binaries that lay outside of the male-female gender binary. The purple represents people who are a mix of the binary genders. The black represents people who are no gender, and the white represents people who identify with multiple or all genders. Let's take a look at the photos that inspired this week's dish. As with the photos that inspired the previous 2 weeks' dishes, you can find these photos on my Pinterest at Cooking With Them. I've placed them on a board titled Pride 2020 Dish Inspirations. I have 2 photos this week that inspired this dish, the first of which is itself a cake. Now what I really like about this cake is its use of fresh fruit arranged on the top and around the side to give it kind of a nice polished look. I'm going to do that myself, as I use fruit to represent the black of the non-binary flag. I actually grabbed this image because of its bright yellow color, which I'm going to use for the yellow gold stripe on the flag. One of the layers of the cake, I think I'm going to make a pineapple, ginger, and turmeric, just to get that nice yellow coloring, and because I think the flavor will work well with the rest of the dish. So the plan this week is to make a 2-layer cake, but include 4 layers of coloring. To do that, I'm going to make 2 layers of cake with a layer of frosting in between. And then I'm going to place some berries on top to make that last layer. Now for the bottom, I'm going to use the yellow, which will be the ginger, turmeric, and pineapple cake. For the top layer, I am going to use the purple, which will be a white cake but with some blueberry juice added to stain it a nice purple color. The middle layer, I am going to make a substitute for buttercream frosting to represent the white. And then the top layer, I'm going to place some fruit to represent the black. I will use a mixture of blueberries and blackberries. So let's get started making this cake. I have made exactly 3 cakes before in my life, and 2 of them turned out pretty well, 1 of them didn't really work. This will be my first time attempting to make a cake since discovering my food allergies. Cakes themselves are feared by many amateur bakers because they're seen as rather difficult, and in many cases they can be. I have the added challenge now of trying to substitute some of the core ingredients for this cake with something that is allergy friendly. There are 4 main substitutions that I'm going to have to make for this recipe. The first, of course, is a substitution for the milk. I'm going to use oat milk, as I've come to do for many of my recipes. The next substitution is for the eggs. I'm going to use some bananas because they'll give a similar structure. I also believe that the flavor of the banana will go well with the rest of the cake. I actually looked into several different vegan butter substitutes in an attempt to find something that I could use, but every single brand that's carried at my local supermarket is based on soy, and thus will still not work. So in place of the butter, I am going with some all-purpose shortening that is based off of palm oil. The last thing that I need to substitute is the flour. I'm going with some gluten-free flour, and I'm actually going to make some additions to the recipe as well to help account for the fact that this is gluten-free flour and it's not cake flour. Cake flour is a little softer and gives you a much nicer consistency in your final cake. In order to make up for the fact that this is not cake flour, I'm actually going to substitute a small amount of the flour for some arrowroot starch instead. Arrowroot is simply a common alternative to cornstarch and happens to be what I have laying around right now. The other thing I'm going to do with the flour is add some xanthan gum. Now, xanthan gum acts as a thickener and gives some structure back into the flour. Gluten itself is a structure, so when you take it out of the flour and you try to bake stuff with it, these baked goods will kind of spread out and go flat. The xanthan gum will help prevent that. Now, additionally, to help counter the effects of some of these substitutions, I'm going to use another trick that's very common in vegan baking. I'm going to add a little bit of white wine vinegar to my batter, and I'm also going to add a little extra of the baking powder. The reason for this is because the baking powder and the vinegar will react together and are part of what helps the cake rise. And I want to make sure that I give as much opportunity for this cake to rise, since I'm taking out eggs, traditional flour, and other key ingredients that are usually involved in that process. We're going to start by making the blueberry juice that will serve as a purple coloring for the top layer of the cake. To do this, we're just going to extract the juices from the blueberries by boiling them in water and then mashing them. We're going to put this on to boil. And while we're waiting for that, we're going to get started preparing the other fruit. I'm going to cut up this pineapple to use it in the cake. I've now chopped up a quarter of the pineapple into fine pieces, and I'm going to add these into the cake near the end. Now that these blueberries have had a chance to boil a little bit, we're going to smash them up. Now we're going to boil this down a little bit more. Next, we're going to combine together the wet ingredients, the bananas, the milk, and the vanilla extract. I'm going to take my 2 bananas and mash them up just like I have with other recipes, so that way it's not chunky. Once that's mashed, we will go ahead and add 1 cup of oat milk. We are now only 1,000 preservatives away from commercial grade banana milk. Now vanilla extract. I'm going to go with 2 teaspoons. I guess that's 2 teaspoons. We now have a very vanilla-y, banana-y oat milk that actually smells amazing. Now we're going to get started by mixing together the dry ingredients. Before starting with anything like this, you want to make sure that you have a nice clean bowl. Bowls can get dust and stuff in them that fall in over time. Make sure you give it a good rinse before you go ahead and get started, and don't forget to dry it off. I'm going to start with the whisk attachment. Now the original recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups of flour. Since I'm using gluten-free flour, I'm going to just use 2 cups and substitute in the remaining 1/4 cup for the powdered arrowroot. Now for the xanthan gum, I'm going to follow the manufacturer's recommendations and add 1 teaspoon total, because I'm using 2 cups of flour. This stuff has a very interesting smell. We will go ahead and whisk these together. And now that those are whisked together, we'll go ahead and add the remainder of the dry ingredients. We'll do 1 3/4 cup of sugar, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm scraping down the sides here, which is something you'll want to do when mixing to ensure that everything is mixed evenly. At this point, I'm actually going to pause and take a moment to prepare the cake pans. It's a common mistake to leave preparing the pans until the last minute. The problem is, once you combine all of your ingredients together and you're letting the batter sit there, the chemical reactions are taking place. You don't want that to all happen before you have a chance to actually bake it. So we're going to make sure we prepare these pans right before we combine our wet and dry ingredients. Now Now I'm going to prepare this pan by simply taking some of my butter substitute, using a paper towel and spreading it around. I need to wash my hands up. I'm now going to take the circular pieces of parchment paper and place them in the bottom of the pan. This will help stop the cake from sticking, and when I need to remove it from the pan, I can turn it upside down and give it a good tap. We'll put a little more butter substitute on top of the parchment paper. At this point, most recipes will call for flouring the pan. Now, I have a bit of a sweet tooth, and this is a cake after all, so I'm going to actually dust it with some sugar instead of flour. The goal of flouring, or sugaring the pan in this case, is to give it a nice even coat. We'll now put these pans aside and finish making our batter. Now I'm going to prepare some ginger to add in the cake. This is actually working surprisingly well. Just taking a spoon and scraping off the skin, basically. I'm now going to go ahead and reverse cream 12 tablespoons of the butter substitute. Reverse creaming is a process where you take the butter or butter substitute and cream it into the dry ingredients before mixing in the remainder of the wet ingredients. This tends to give the cake a better texture. To do this, I'm going to switch to the paddle attachment. So the batter now has a nice grainy texture there that is kind of smooth and combined, but ready for the wet ingredients. We'll now add in about half of the milk mixture that we made before, and we're going to mix it for 1 minute, then we will add in the remainder of the milk mixture. At this point, I'm now going to separate the batter in half and add in the colorings. Got some nice cake batter going there. For our purple batter, we're going to strain this blueberry juice that I've allowed to cool that we made earlier. Don't want to add too much liquid because it will change the consistency of the batter a lot. Want just enough to color it. Now have a nice purplish batter. I actually decided to put some of the blueberries onto the batter itself, just to see if it gets more of that color, and blueberries taste great. Going to add in our previously prepared ginger, some of our pineapple, and to help with the yellow coloring, some turmeric. Turns out I did a really bad job eyeballing cutting that in half, so we have way more of our yellow layer than we do of our purple layer. That's okay, I'll just have to make sure that I leave this one in the oven a little bit longer, take the other one a little bit earlier. And with that, we're going to go ahead and pop both of these in the oven at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes. So our cakes are done baking. I've given them a chance to cool completely. Now I'm going to take them out of the containers and make the frosting. For the frosting, we're going to put in 1 cup of our butter substitute. Next, we're going to put in 2 pounds of powdered sugar. Now I weighed this. This is about 3 pounds of powdered sugar, so I'm going to use about 2/3 of this. We'll call that 2/3. I'll also add 1/3 of a cup of oat milk and just a tablespoon of vanilla. I'm also going to throw in a pinch of salt to help bring out the flavor. And now let's assemble the cake. The next step is to assemble and plate the cake. To do that, we're gonna start by taking these layers out of the pans and cutting them so they have a nice flat surface on top to work with, so they will stack better. Whoop, that was pretty painless. Remove the parchment paper we put in there earlier. The idea here is just to get a flatter surface to work with so it helps the cake stack better, and we more or less achieved that. It did come out a nice gold color though. I'm going to spread a layer of the frosting in between. Now let's add the second layer. This one side is stuck on here pretty good. So it's very flexible, almost like a sponge cake maybe. I'm not going to try to cut the top of this just because of how delicate it is and the fact that it is the top layer, so I don't have to worry about stacking much more on it. I'm just going to coat the outside in a layer of frosting. Part of the reason to do this is you might notice the cake looks a little bit messy right now. The outer layer of frosting will help hide some of the mess. And now to decorate the cake. I've got some little triangles of pineapple that I've cut up previously that I'm just gonna lay in around the edges. And now we're gonna finish by putting some berries on top. One more right there. And there we have it, our completed cake. Now I actually filmed this video over the course of 2 days because making the cake itself just took too long and I had to let it cool before I finished the decorating. This morning news broke that the US Supreme Court ruled that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does protect LGBTQ people and bars discrimination in the workplace from gender identity and sexual orientation. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this historic moment, especially since I just made a cake to celebrate my birthday, Pride Month, and now this historic victory. And there we have it. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion of the series next week, where I'm going to wrap up all these lessons together and make a statement about pride in cooking. See you next time. I'm gonna go with 2 teaspoons. Guess that's 2 teaspoons.